Washington. When the WannaCry ransomware attack spread across Britain, Japan, Russia, Taiwan, and places in between last May, it took only a few days for private firms that looked at the code to come to some pretty quick conclusions. The attack almost certainly came from North Korea. The North Koreans almost certainly used computer code that had leaked from the inner sanctum of the National Security Agency. And the ransomware part was a scam. If you paid off the hackers, your data still wasn't restored. Yet it took until October for the British government to identify North Korea as the culprit in an attack that paralyzed its healthcare system for a few days, and until mid-December for the Trump administration, in a presentation at the White House, to reach that same conclusion. So what was the penalty for the government in Pyongyang for unleashing a devastating cyber attack? There was none. Nothing. Not even the kind of weak economic sanctions that the Obama administration imposed on the North 3 years before for its attack on Sony Pictures Entertainment. President Trump has used just about every lever you can use, short of starving the people of North Korea, to change their behavior. Mr. Trump's Homeland Security Advisor, Thomas P. Bossert, said when he made the name and shame announcement blaming the North. So we don't have a lot of room left here to apply pressure. Securing the world against cyber attacks from nations, criminal groups, vandals, and teenagers will be on the agenda when many of the world's top leaders gather at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, this week. As usual, there is a flurry of reports, and entrepreneurs will declare they have technological solutions at hand. But the fact remains that the major powers of the world have been unable to come up with a viable means of deterring the most damaging attacks. It still takes too long to formally identify the culprits, and the responses, as Mr. Bossert indicated, are insufficient. Efforts to establish norms of behavior got a promising start, but are now falling apart. No one can even agree on when an act of aggression in cyberspace amounts to an act of war. The Pentagon, in its first nuclear strategy review since President Trump took office, is even proposing to use the threat of unleashing nuclear weapons against a country or group that delivered a devastating cyber attack against the critical infrastructure of the United States or its allies. But that doesn't help with the problem of everyday attacks. The most talented state sponsors of attacks, mostly Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, have carefully calibrated their operations in cyberspace to achieve their strategic aims while avoiding a real shooting war. So far they have succeeded. While there have been indictments of Iranian and Chinese hackers in major strikes on the United States, they have never seen the inside of an American courtroom. North Korea has been a case study in how a nation learns to make use of its cyber weapons for disruption, revenge, or profit, without fear of serious retaliation. It has learned how to station hackers around the world in China, Malaysia, Thailand, and elsewhere, and has gotten away with bolder and bolder attacks, from WannaCry to its raid on Bangladesh's central bank, which nearly resulted in the theft of $1 billion. The transfers were halted after $81 million had passed through the SWIFT system, the International Clearinghouse for Transactions, after someone at the New York Fed discovered a spelling error, the word foundation for foundation, and stopped the heist. As James Lewis of the Center for Strategic and International Studies put it recently, North Korea is both cautious and cunning in its use of force, including cyber attack. But he added, the North has been successful only against poorly protected targets, of which there are many, suggesting that there is a relatively low ceiling for its cyber attack capabilities. In fact, the explosion of state-sponsored, Sophisticated cyber attacks over the past 7 or 8 years has been fueled, in large part, by the expansion of poorly protected targets. Yes, banks and major utilities have, for the large part, tightened their defenses, and tens of billions of dollars have been made by companies promising all kinds of cyber protections, from the most basic programs loaded on your laptop to sophisticated systems designed to anticipate future action, or watch for variations in the normal behavior of users. But none of that has prevented cyberspace from becoming what President Barack Obama termed the Wild West, a territory of anarchy, where adversaries take free shots at one another. In the past 5 years, these attacks have become the cheapest way for nations to undercut one another in the name of bigger strategic goals. Yet the world has been unable to decide what constitutes fair game, and what should be off limits. For years officials talked about their fear of a cyber Pearl Harbor, a devastating strike against the power grid that would turn out the lights from Boston to Washington, or London to Rome. That has not happened, save for limited strikes in Ukraine, widely attributed to Russian hackers, that seemed intended to send a message that they could attack critical infrastructure at any time. Countries have sensed what would happen if they went too far. Instead, cyber attacks have taken a far more subtle turn. The Russian-led attacks on the 2016 American election and similar efforts in France and Germany last year are prime examples. While United Nations experts had been struggling to come up with norms of behavior in cyberspace, a consensus about what was off-limits, like attacks on power grids or safety systems, for example, few were thinking about the use of the technology to influence elections. In fact, the election systems in the United States, the foundation of American democracy, were never on the list of critical infrastructure until Mr. Obama's Homeland Security Secretary, Jeh Johnson, added them in the last days of the administration. By then it was too late. Infrastructure is only part of the problem. The evidence that has poured out of the United States after more than a year of congressional investigations has left no doubt that Russian hackers working largely on behalf of two of Moscow's spy services, the SVR and the GRU, did far more than use cyber tools to break into the Democratic National Committee and the accounts of key players in Hillary Clinton's campaign. The sophisticated use of bots to target key demographic groups with Twitter messages, Facebook ads and just ordinary looking social media exchanges made it clear that we have entered a new world, in which states marry some of the oldest propaganda techniques with the newest ways to disseminate a divisive message. Yet thinking about how to regulate that kind of activity is tying the West in knots. President Emmanuel Macron in France is proposing that government authorities be able to take down fake news during elections, declaring in his New Year's speech that if we want to protect liberal democracies, we must be strong and have clear rules. Yet those rules clearly could not survive in the United States, where First Amendment protections would prohibit the government from stepping in and declaring what is fake and what is not. President Trump's own declarations about what constitutes fake news, including articles about the Russian election activity, underscore the dangers of putting that power into government hands. There are other complications. After the election hacks in the United States, many called for real identities on the internet, so the world would know exactly who is tweeting or posting. Sensible as it may sound, it would also be a boon to the Russians, the Chinese and any authoritarian government looking to crack down on dissent. In short, the best way to solve the problem of election meddling and anonymous attacks would be a dictator's dream. There have been a few successes in setting norms of behavior, particularly when it comes to banning child pornography or cracking down on intellectual property theft. But those are the easiest issues on which to agree. The United States, for example, would never support rules that banned espionage. And what about rules prohibiting the placement of implants in foreign computer networks, so that in the future they could monitor activity or plant malware to bring a network down? American and European officials raise the alarm whenever they find such implants in their electrical grids. But they also quietly place them in hundreds of thousands of foreign networks. That is how Presidents Bush and Obama got inside Iran's nuclear enrichment site at Natanz, with the Stuxnet code. It is a power that the United States and its allies have no intention of giving up.